In this video, you will learn the factoring pattern for x squared plus bx plus c when c is negative. Now, if this sounds confusing, let's give you an example of what we mean. So in the last lesson, you learned how to factor if the last number is positive. So you learned something like, x squared plus 6x plus 8, and you factored something like this to become x plus 4 times x plus 2. So we did that in the last lesson, where this last number here is positive. So in this lesson, we're going to work with the same type of expression, but where that last number is going to be negative. So for example, you have x squared minus 10x minus 24. Now the process to factor is exactly the same as with the number being positive here at the end. Alright, and remember, factoring is the reverse of distributing. So my end goal when I factor is to have two things in parentheses. So when it's a trinomial, so three terms, it's going to factor to be two things in parentheses, where I have x, and then some number here and here. Alright, so the numbers that go here and here, those are determined by seeing what two numbers multiply to get negative 24 and add to get negative 10, the middle term. So we are going to begin by looking at this negative 24. And we see what numbers multiply together to get negative 24. So what are the factors of negative 24? And then once we find those, we're going to add them to see which ones give me the middle term of negative 10. So first we have positive 1 times negative 24. That would give me a negative 24 for the last term, and would add to get negative 23. Okay, it could be negative 1 and positive 24. That would give me positive 23 when I add them together. Could be 2 times negative 12, which would add to be negative 10. Could be negative 2 and positive 12, which would add to get positive 10. Could be 3 times negative 8, which would add to get negative 5. Or negative 3 and positive 8, which would add to be positive 5. Or we could have 4 times negative 6, which would add to get negative 2. Or negative 4 times positive 6, which would add to be positive 2. So when we look through this list of factors, we need to find the one that would add to get the middle term and multiply to get this last number. So here we see the 2 and negative 12 would do that. If I have a positive 2 and a negative 12, they would multiply to get negative 24 and would add to get the negative 10 that we need for this middle term. So my factored form would be x plus 2 times x minus 12. And I can confirm by multiplying back through if I wanted. So I could do x times x to get x squared, x times negative 12 to get negative 12x, 2 times x to get 2x, and then 2 times negative 12 to get negative 24. And that would equal what I started with. So we can double check to make sure that we're doing it correctly, but our final factored form is what we wanted, and that is x plus 2 times x minus 12. Next example, we have x squared plus 3x minus 10. So when we factor, it's going to look like this, where we have x as the first term, and then a number here and here. To find those numbers, I see what two numbers would multiply to get negative 10 and would add to get positive 3. So looking at the negative 10, we look at the factors to see what would multiply to get negative 10. So we have 1 times negative 10, and if we add 1 and negative 10 together, we get negative 9. We could do negative 1 and positive 10, which would add to be a positive 9. We could do 2 times negative 5 to get negative 10, which would add to be negative 3. Or we could do negative 2 and positive 5, which would add to be a positive 3. And this last one is the one that I want, because multiplied together we get negative 10, we add them to get 3, which is the middle number. So my solution is x minus 2 and then x plus 5. Put the minus 2 in and the positive 5 in. One more example. We now have x and y in this trinomial expression. So having the y in there makes it a little more confusing for people sometimes, but it's really the same thing, where we are going to factor. We're going to have x here and here, and then something goes there and there. All right, so let's look at the number components. So ignore the y for now. We have negative 18 and negative 7. So the number part that goes in here are two numbers that multiply to get negative 18 and that add to get negative 7. So let's look at the factors of negative 18. So to get negative 18, we could do a 1 and negative 18, and those would add to get negative 17. We could do negative 1 and positive 18, which would add to be positive 17. Could do positive 2 and negative 9, and those would add to get negative 7, and that's what we wanted, right? We wanted negative 7, so we'll stop there. So it's going to be a 2, so positive 2 and a negative 9. All right, so that would multiply to get negative 18, and those would add to get negative 7. Now looking at the y, how do we incorporate the y into this? And sorry, this should be an x right here. I don't know why I had a y. That's x minus 9. And then the y, if we have a y here and here, y times y would give me y squared for this last part, right? 2y times negative 9y is negative 18y squared. And then when I do the inner and the outer, so the x times negative 9y, I have negative 9xy, and then the inner 2 times xy, that would add to get negative 7xy, which is what I wanted for that middle term. So when in doubt, you can experiment by plugging the y's in somewhere, and then you can double check by distributing. And if you distribute, you'll find that you will get the same answer back out. So the final answer is x plus 2y times x minus 9y. And that concludes our lesson for today. We will see you next time.